Chapter 6. Tony, the 4-day knot, and June 2024. Tony before the collapse, a fragile orbit. By June 2024, Tony Mansour-Tauque's illness had been hanging over the family for a long time. Tony was my cousin. He had leukodystrophy, a cruel neurological disease that strips away function slowly, and then suddenly. He was degenerating rapidly. The last time I saw him in hospital, I couldn't hold the tears back after I gave him a notepad, pencils, and textus, in the vain hope that they might somehow help him regenerate. That drawing or writing might pull something back that his nervous system was losing. After that visit, I walked to the cafe outside with his sister-in-law, Candice, my cousin Halim's wife. She mentioned, almost matter-of-factly, that Tony now had trouble swallowing solids, and that he'd already choked once. That phrase, "he's already choked," echoed in my mind for the rest of the year after his passing. His body was clearly degenerating, and the last cruel joke from God was that not only could he not eat anymore, he couldn't breathe. In his final days, his lungs were failing and filling with fluid. He was drowning from the inside. At the same time, I was teaching myself to swim. That contrast, Tony drowning in his own lungs, while I fought to stay afloat in cold ocean pools, still leaves me feeling guilty. For me, Tony wasn't a neat medical case. He was part of a pattern I already carried in my body. Men in my family going under in ways that felt preventable and mishandled. I had watched another uncle, not Tony's father, who suffered from schizophrenia, get worse and worse at the hands of an abusive family that insisted they were taking care of him. I had just watched my own brother in a psych ward on suicide watch, raw and exposed. And in the background of all that sat my grandmother, my father's mother, who had a stroke in the early 2000s, lost movement on one side of her body, never walked again, and only degenerated further as the years went on. In my mind, my family couldn't help her. They just made her worse. The same way they made my uncle worse. The same way they made my brother worse. The same way they made me worse. In that state, I folded Tony into the same orbit. My inner commentary was blunt and brutal. Here we go. Another one bites the dust. Another one whose illness can't be overcome. Rather than overcoming, they degenerate. Just like my Uncle Tony, just like my brother, just like my grandmother, and now Tony from leukodystrophy. That was how I categorized him at the time. I know now that this was wrong and unfair. Tony's immediate family did everything they could for him. They were not the ones neglecting him. The pattern I was seeing was real in some places and distorted in others. But in June 2024, with my own mind highly manic, cognitively fraying, and emotionally unstable, I could not hold that nuance. My brain slotted Tony into the same doomed storyline I had already written for the rest of us. By the time we reached June, that tension was sitting on top of everything else. High THC use, untreated bipolar mood swings, trust disputes, AVO machinery, and an already overstretched nervous system. Tony's decline didn't start the spiral, but it sat right on its fault line. The 4-day knot around Tony's death, 15 to 19 June 2024. By the middle of June 2024, my mind was already running hot. I'd been started on lithium on 14 June after seeing my psychiatrist. The community mental health team already knew me from earlier crises. The AVO battles, the trust disputes, the constant legal and financial pressure were all active in the background. I was smoking a lot of THC, sleeping erratically, and living inside a moral storyboard where every family decision had cosmic weight. Into that frame came the 4 days around Tony's death, 15 to 19 June 2024. When I look at them now through the recordings, photos, and hospital paperwork, they read like a compressed knot where grief, mania, and old trauma are braided so tightly it is hard to see the join. 15 June. Do the right thing for once, Dad. The record starts before dawn. On 15 June, My phone shows screenshots saved at 6:15 a.m. and 6:17 a.m. A little after 8:20 a.m., there's a photo of a wet residential street in Greenacre. Two modern two-story houses, a dark ute, rain on the bitumen, the kind of overcast morning where everything looks cold and slightly unreal. This was Hallam's house. I had driven there in the rain to stare at it. These are the streets I drive most, the grid that holds my house, my family's movements, cousins' houses, and the parish life that has shaped us. Around that time, I drive past and photograph Hallam's place with the outdoor statue of the Virgin Mary, the Virgin facing inward towards his own front door. In my manic frame, the angle of the statue becomes evidence. I decide it proves that Halim's faith is self-protective, turned towards his own thresholds instead of outwards to others. I don't knock on the door. I don't talk to him. I talk to the statue and to my phone. Later that day, I recorded a voice memo titled, "Let do the right thing for once, Dad." 15 June 2024. It's exactly what it sounds like. A 5-minute confrontation with my father, delivered into a voice memo. I tell him he needs to sell 15 Auto Street, restructure Happy Lion, the family trust, clean up the whole asset map, and send my Auntie Gada back to Lebanon. She had returned with her husband and children after 20 years raising her family there. Listening back, it is a volatile mix of excitement and rage, property dispute, father conflict, mania. Inside the recording, my thinking moves like this. If he sells Auto Street and the other properties, then the family can be purified. Then my childhood can be repaired. Then the chaos might finally end. The mania sits in the compression. Decades of hurt are shoved through the single valve of a property transaction. I frame it as moral urgency. Do the right thing for once. I'm hyperventilating, and at one point I even say I can feel this as a lead-up to mania. But that insight doesn't slow me down. It just becomes another line in the speech. On the same date sits another memo. Sandy is trashy. 15 June 2024. I swing from self-consciousness, worrying that my messages are too personal, straight into sexual shaming of a cousin based on an old incident. Sandy is the sister of Saeed and Majid, and the daughter of my uncle Maroon. I was using her name to shame them, not realizing how shameful it was making me. I tell myself this is radical honesty. I compare what I'm doing to Tolstoy's journals. In reality, I'm stripping other people of privacy in order to make my own pain legible. I insist that the family should read my recordings like scripture, as if my humiliation and theirs are the price of truth. The third key file for that day is "You are not a Christian." 15th of June 2024. I talk about Halim's statue again, about Virgin Mary imagery, about how faith only counts if it's lived between brothers. I use the direction of a lawn statue as proof that my cousin's religion is hypocritical, that they care more about facade than mercy. Taken together, the 15th of June material shows a particular kind of manic pattern. I replace actual conversations with recordings and symbols. I don't sit with my father or Halim. I speak into the phone and read meaning off bricks and statues. I move quickly from financial reality to moral indictment. A rate's notice or a loan becomes proof of spiritual failure. I'm already thinking in absolutes. People are either trash or holy, Christian or not, protectors or wolves. Tony is barely mentioned in these 15 June recordings, but he's already part of the emotional background. In my head, he sits in the same category as my uncle, my brother, and my grandmother. Another vulnerable relative in a system I believe has a history of letting its weak fall through the cracks. By mid-June, I folded his illness into that private pattern, even though I don't yet understand what's actually happening inside his body. 16 June, sell all the assets. The next day, the clock is even more skewed. I record a memo timestamped 3:05 a.m. on Sunday, 16th June. I greet the recorder. Good morning. It is still 3:05 a.m. on a Sunday. I sound calm at the start, almost thoughtful, but the content jolts. In that single recording, I recall being a child sent to Lebanon with my brother, while my father stayed behind in Sydney. Describe him, in vivid detail, as selling heroin and sleeping with a woman named Rachel in Yaguna. Call that discovery a core trauma that shaped everything, and then jump straight to the solution. Sell every major family asset, Happy Lion, Redfern, Villiers Street, and distribute the cash. It is 3 a.m. logic, but it doesn't feel like that at the time. It feels like revelation. The recording weaves together childhood betrayal, heroin, infidelity, and liquidation. The transcript makes the emotional logic obvious. If secrets and property and power imbalances poison the family, then the cure is to burn the whole structure down. By dawn, my photos show I'm in the city. At 6:43 a.m. on 16th of June, I am capturing images of the church from the Domain athletic field and of St. Mary's Cathedral itself. These photos are significant. I was continually moving between St. Patrick's and the cathedral during this time, looking for sanctuary. In the frame now, it's just another city shot. At the time, it was part of the same moral map, figures in stone, watching over a city of verdicts and debts. That afternoon, at 4:43 p.m., I captured the inside of my house in Greenacre. A damaged gyprock wall in my office, covered in post-it notes and scribbled plans, what I call Dad's sticky wall. It lists projects, Blaxland, Lethbridge, target loan-to-value ratios, settlement dates, instructions to hire a quantity surveyor, names of consultants. It's my attempt to visualize everything my father is juggling and everything I think is going wrong. I took that photo because I wanted evidence, proof that he lived inside this web of projects and numbers, proof that the mess I was feeling actually existed on the plaster. I was thinking like a builder, a son, and a private prosecutor all at once. The wall became a physical counterpart to my recordings, another surface where every stress could be written down and turned into a case. On 16 June, Tony is still alive at Concord. I'm not with him. I'm awake at 3 a.m., telling a recording that my father's heroin use and adultery can be fixed by one giant asset sale. I'm photographing civic statues and strategy walls. The illness that is killing my cousin is almost entirely off-screen. What I can see, what I can bear to look at, are numbers, houses, icons, and debts. 17 June, Osco, Concord, and hearing he is gone. 17 June 2024 is the day everything collides. The hospital discharge summary records the timeline plainly, but the reality was chaotic. On that date, I was arrested by Auburn police and brought to Concord Hospital under Section 22. They detained me because I had sent violent audio messages threatening my cousins Said and Majid. The psychiatric registrar refers me to the community mental health team for follow-up. My wife tells them I've sent threatening messages earlier in the month. The record also notes that I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and started on lithium 3 days earlier. At 4:35 a.m. that morning, I recorded a monologue that opens with me talking about going to fitness first and then quickly turns into a high-speed rant about Osco. This was the company owned by Tony's brother Halim, but in the early morning dark, it was no longer just a business to me. I had cast it as a grave evil, a fortress of theft and betrayal that I needed to tear down. I list specific amounts, 100,000 here, 14,000 there. I name jobs and sites and invoices. I call my cousins thieves, cokeheads, cowards. I tell Youssef he has to leave them, that I'm the only one prepared to say what they really are. The wall of figures and insults feels controlled to me at the time. I'm certain I'm the only clear-eyed one, the righteous auditor of a corrupt little world. In the background, unseen in my own recording, Tony's condition is deteriorating fast. Leukodystrophy has stolen his speech, his continence, his dexterity. He's in and out of hospital. On 17 June, he reaches the end of that rapid decline. At some point that day, while I am on the same hospital campus, my cousin dies. I'm admitted to the mental health unit at Concord. The details of the assessment are in the paperwork, but I remember the moment that cuts through. My mother on the ward, telling me that Tony is dead. There is no scene of me holding his hand. I'm the one in the bed, the one being observed. My reaction is oddly flat. There are no theatrics, no collapsed sobbing. I have already been crying for months in my own way, into phones and steering wheels and microphones. When she tells me, it's as if the words bounce off a nervous system that is already overloaded. It registers and doesn't register. My brain does with the news what it has done with everything else. It tries to turn it into story. That night, Tony's body is in the mortuary downstairs. His brothers, Yusef's wife Emma, and the rest of the family are beginning the rituals of real grief. Calls, logistics, telling relatives who loved him. I am on an observation list, being asked if I still want to kill anyone, being told that my messages are not okay. On the graph of my life, 2 lines cross on that date. His body failing and my mind tipping into an episode that will take months to fully unfold. 18 June, Tony is dead, and Halim killed his brother. The next day, 18 June, the recordings show what my mind does with the news. There are 2 crucial files I recorded. Halim killed his brother, 18 June 2024. Tony is dead, 18 June 2024. The first is pure rage. It is intense, vitriolic, and that is accurate. I address Halim directly. Just a big fucking fuck you to Halim again for killing his fucking brother. I end with, kill yourself, bye, love you. The sequence is jarring, even now. Death wish followed immediately by affection. It shows how split my emotional wiring is at that point. I'm furious, terrified, and still attached, all in one breath. In that memo, the disease itself almost disappears. Leukodystrophy, the thing that actually killed Tony, is reduced to a backdrop. In my head, there has to be a human culprit. I take all the helplessness of watching his decline, all the fear of neurological degeneration I had folded into my private pattern, and I pour it onto Halim. The second clip, Tony is dead, has a different tone. It is still accusatory, but more reflective. I talk about his last meal, in my mind, McDonald's chicken nuggets and chips, and treat that detail as if it is a piece of forensic evidence. I repeat a line about him already choking on solids that had lodged in my mind from an earlier conversation. I tell myself this proves neglect, proves that my family didn't care enough, proves that they fed him the wrong thing. I also rehearse a narrative of exclusion, that while Tony was dying, they called the police on me, that my erratic behavior was actually me trying to help, that I was the only one willing to face the truth. The recording swings between sorrow and justification, sorrow that Tony is gone, rage that I wasn't told, and a determination to hear a voice that others are too cowardly to listen to. None of this is accurate as an account of his care or of that day's events. At that point in June, I don't understand the medical reality of leukodystrophy or the specifics of his last hours. What I do understand is the shape of a story where vulnerable people are abandoned and someone gets blamed. My manic grief reaches for that shape because it is familiar and because the alternative, a blameless, unstoppable decline, is unbearable. On the same day, the community mental health team tries to call me. The discharge summary notes a brief conversation on 18 June and a second attempt later with no success. When they do reach me properly on 19 June, I tell them I don't need mental health support, that my real problem is money, and ask for help with Centrelink. I decline further contact. So on 18 June, 2 tracks run side by side. In my recordings, I am accusing Halim of murder and replaying Tony's death in my head as a scene of negligence and cruelty. In the clinical record, I am already minimizing my mental health crisis and redirecting attention to finances. It's a snapshot of the way my bipolar mind, under THC and acute stress, tries to manage an intolerable loss by attacking, simplifying, and deflecting. 19 June. Driving into the fog, walking through the cemetery. On 19 June, the geography changes. My tracking data shows a GPS stamp at 7:37 a.m. Latitude -32.01638, 149.54660. Out near Cucamadera, in the Central West, where my father owns a small farm. The image is a rural road under extreme fog and frost. White grass, a reddish dirt track, a wire fence, the silhouettes of sheds and a tree, barely visible through the mist. To reach that farm, you have to walk through Cucamadera Cemetery. There is no separate driveway. You pass graves first, then the paddocks. In the days around Tony's death and funeral, that fact takes on a private meaning. Instead of going to his funeral with everyone else, I drive out there, to a property I had never visited until a few months earlier, and use that cemetery as the place I visit him. Later, there's a shot of 6 old fridges lined up in a paddock, a kind of accidental art installation, and in the evening, a heavy mixed grill meal in young New South Wales. The day stretches into a long, looping drive, out of Sydney, across the Central West, through farms and country cafes. Somewhere on that road, and on that farm, I record what later becomes a podcast titled Nellie and Majid Taouk's Farm in Cucamadera. In that episode, I talk about the land, my father's ownership, the family history tied to it, and what I think the family should do with it now. Tony is part of that monologue, even when I don't say his name. I use the farm as a kind of surrogate graveside, a place to stand between my father's choices, the family's future, and my cousin's death. Looking at the sequence now, the pattern is stark. On 17 June, I am admitted to hospital and told my cousin is dead. On 18 June, I weaponized that news into recordings about murder and neglect. On 19 June, I am already on the highway, photographing fog, fridges, and breakfast, walking through a rural cemetery to my father's farm, recording a podcast about what the family should do with that land instead of standing at Tony's actual grave. I don't go home and rest. I don't sit still. I move. I drive. I record. I photograph. The movement has its own internal logic. If I keep changing scenery, maybe the pain can't settle. The car, the cemetery, the farm, all become extensions of the sticky wall and the statue and the microphone. Containers big enough to hold what I can't process sitting in one room. In these 4 days, my cousin dies of a fast, brutal neurological disease. I am manic, psychotic at times, spiritually overclocked, and already saturated with older injuries. The recordings and photos don't just show what I did. They show how my mind tried to survive it, by turning streets, houses, statues, walls, numbers, cemeteries, and country roads into a moral diagram where someone can be blamed and I can keep moving. Family, money, religion, the pressure cooker. By early June 2024, before Tony's final decline and before the 4-day window around his death, my inner world was already running at a dangerous temperature. The ingredients were old: family violence, addiction, secrecy, money, and religion. What changed in 2024 was not the facts themselves, but the way my manic mind began to rearrange them into a single burning story. They are corrupt, I am the only one telling the truth, and someone has to pay. Tony's illness landed in that climate, not in a vacuum. Criminality as family origin story. In one of the June podcasts, I open with a line that captures how I was framing my family. I believe I've been brought up by one of the worst, if not the worst families in the Lebanese Maronite community in Sydney. From there, I moved straight into heroin, jail, and domestic abuse. My father becomes the cool drug dealer who turns into a junkie abusive addict. My Uncle Charlie is a monster. My Uncle Marone is a coward and a liar and a loser. The point of the episode isn't subtle. I am sketching a whole system as morally rotten. It isn't just anger, it's architecture. I describe how addiction and violence deform the emotional climate of a household, how asthma attacks are triggered by cigarettes smoked inside, how children are left to absorb chaos while the adults protect their own impulses. In that frame, later events, like Tony's illness, no longer appear as tragic medical facts. They become evidence in a longer indictment. This family destroys its vulnerable. That's the lens I was building in the first half of June. Happy Lion and the theology of money. Around the same time, I am talking publicly about Happy Lion, the family trusts, as if they are both financial instruments and moral experiments gone wrong. In the Desolation of Happy Lion episode, I use the brothers Karamazov to explain how the trust structure concentrated power in the hands of one uncle and paralyzed everyone else. I talk about two confusing trusts, a construction loan and a decade of rental income, and then say the real problem is not the paperwork, but what it reveals. They will do destructive things to other people to protect it. They do not have a healthy relationship with money. In a different recording, the one I later title, Sell All the Assets in Happy Lion Pty Limited and Give Each Beneficiary an Equal Share, I push that logic to its extreme. I talk about my father sleeping with Rachel while my mother took us to Lebanon, dealing heroin, going to jail, abandoning us again to work overseas. Then I jump to the solution. Happy Lion was a mistake. Redfern boarding house needs to be sold. The Villiers Street development site needs to be sold. It's time to stop pretending that what they're doing is good. From a distance, it reads like a manifesto. Liquidate the assets, equalize the power, stop the cycle of hoarding and abuse. From the inside, it felt like relief. If money and secrecy were the poison, then burning down the whole structure offered the fantasy of clean air. By early June, that fantasy was no longer just a thought experiment. It was a plan I rehearsed out loud, over and over, in the car, in voice notes, in podcasts. The trusts weren't just legal vehicles. They were characters in a moral drama. And I positioned myself as the one honest narrator who could finally expose them. Uncle Tony, gaslighting in the pattern of abandoned men. In parallel, I am making episodes about my Uncle Tony, my father's brother with chronic psychosis, that crystallize another theme. The family abandons sick men, then blames them for collapsing. In one podcast, I describe how relatives mock him, poke at him, then act shocked when he explodes. They'd frustrate and annoy him to the point that he'd want to lash out. They only see the end result. They don't see what led up to it. I talk about being in an apartment with his brother, how unsafe it feels, how the abuse has been normalized for decades. I say things like, "My family are the type of people to just abandon you when you're sick, rather than help you get better." Those sentences are about Uncle Tony, but they are also about my father, and by June 2024, about me. In my mind, there is a growing category called vulnerable men the family failed. My psychotic uncle, my addicted father, my own younger self, and now my cousin Tony with leukodystrophy. The pattern I see is the same. A man breaks down, the family turns away or turns on him. The story becomes that he was the problem. That pattern is what makes Tony's illness so unbearable for me. It feels like a replay, and I cannot stand another replay. Generational trauma and the church's stage. By mid-June, I'm also talking about the Maronite church and community as extensions of the same system. Patriarchal, image-obsessed, more concerned with appearances than suffering. In the Prostitution, Maronites in Sydney and Tahi episode, I introduced Tahi, a friend of Saeed's I met at a Bucks party. He told me he had punched out his abusive father, a story that took on symbolic weight in my manic mind. I link my father's drug use, my grandfather's abandonment, and the wider diaspora's grind through war, migration, and poverty. I describe my grandfather leaving his children in Lebanon, my father repeating the pattern, but worse because it was mixed with cocaine and heroin and prostitution. The church scenes that will become so charged around Tony's death, statues, icons, parish politics are already emotionally loaded. I am emailing priests, planning a triathlon as a kind of penitential pilgrimage, and recording long reflections about Christian ethics and hypocrisy. By June, being a real Christian has become one of my core measuring sticks. I use it on myself, on my father, on Halim, on almost everyone. So when I later stand in front of Halim's Virgin Mary statue, photographing it and reading meaning into its placement, I am not starting from zero. I'm stepping into a stage I've already built, a world in which religious symbols, business decisions, and family loyalties are all part of one moral trial. Betrayal, wolves, and the search for a clean line. The private memos from early June show the same themes, only closer to the bone. In a recording to my cousin Rita, who I had called out of the blue, and who spoke to me with a humanity that made me admire him, I talk at 1 a.m. about being exhausted and trying to work out where the anger was coming from. I describe paying another relative's mortgage, losing $100,000, being treated like prey by the people I trusted. It's beyond forgiveness, Rita. They're possessed by the devil. They're wolves. The language is religious and animal at the same time. My family are no longer just flawed. They are predators, surrounded by spiritual darkness. That is how it felt from the inside. To admit any softness or nuance would have meant opening the door to doubt, and doubt was intolerable. If they were wolves, then my rage, my plans, my recordings all made sense. In WhatsApp threads about Happy Lion and BZK, you can see the more technical layer of the same story. Late-night calculations about Villiers Street and Redfern, spreadsheets, bank ledgers, feasibility studies, and the dawning suspicion that large sums have been diverted or hidden. The emotional logic is simple. I worked hard. I believed we were building something together. I now think I've been used and discarded. When that belief fuses with the older story of childhood betrayal, Uncle Tony's abuse, and generational trauma, it stops being a business dispute. It becomes a cosmic case file, where Tony sits in this system. By the time Tony's lungs begin to fail in early 2024, my mind is already primed to see his illness not as a random neurological catastrophe, but as another chapter in the same book. I know now that leukodystrophy hit him fast, symptoms emerging around 2023, with a steep decline over months, and by early 2024, he could no longer speak, walk reliably, or control his bladder and bowels. His family were in and out of hospital with him, trying to manage a disease that moved quicker than anyone was prepared for. At the time, I didn't hold that full picture. What I felt was the pattern. Another gentle man declining, another body failing, another relative locked into care work, another silence from the wider family system that had already failed so many people. My manic brain slid Tony into the same mental folder as my uncle, my father, and myself. Vulnerable man, abandoned or mishandled. That miscategorization is one of the central wounds this chapter is trying to repair. But in early June 2024, I am not repairing anything. I am still building the case. The pressure before the break. Put together, the pre-15 June landscape looks like this. Public monologues casting my extended family as criminal, cowardly, or monstrous. Detailed forensic work on trusts and loans, feeding an all-or-nothing plan to liquidate everything. Spiritual overinvestment in being the one true Christian voice against hypocrisy, with church life and family life blurred together. A deep identification with abused or neglected men, Uncle Tony, my father, my younger self, and a growing sense that Tony's illness is another test the family is failing. Late-night memos describing my relatives as wolves, the devil, people who would rather destroy me than sign a document. From inside that headspace, Tony's rapid decline could not appear as just a tragic illness. It arrived in a mind already saturated with betrayal narratives, theological language, and spreadsheets of missing money. It landed on a nervous system already stretched by cannabis, sleep loss, legal pressure, and the early stages of mania. By the time we reach 15 June, the pressure cooker is sealed. One more shock, Tony's death, will not simply add grief. It will fuse everything into the 4-day knot that the next sections of this chapter have to unpick. Grief turned outward. Halim, Nana, and the failed protectors. In the weeks around Tony's death, I wasn't just talking into the voice memo app. I was talking into WhatsApp, into the phones of the people closest to him and to me. While I drove around Greenacre, sat in my office under the sticky wall of Post-its, or lay in a hospital bed at Concord, I was sending messages to Halim, Nana, Mum, Emily, and Joe. The same device that held my recordings about Tony's death also held photos, links, and blocks of text that turned my grief into accusation. What the logs show is simple and confronting. I did not keep my Halim killed his brother story inside my head. I pushed it into the family. Halim, from site photos to blame. For years, my thread with Halim is almost boring. Photos of jobs, doors, tiles, cream-colored walls, a quick OK send or thumbs up. It's the chat of two cousins working together, not two enemies. By June 2024, the emotional meaning of that thread has changed. In my manic frame, Halim is no longer just the Osco cousin. He is Tony's older brother, and in my mind, the person who should have stood between Tony and the disease. When Tony dies, that expectation hardens into a verdict. The way I write to him shifts. Instead of photos of work, I send links to YouTube videos where I talk about family criminality, abuse, Happy Lion, and wolves. Instead of brief notes, I send long messages folded with Bible language and threats about court. I drop in lines that imply he's responsible not only for money and jobs, but for Tony's suffering and death. He replies rarely, briefly, or not at all. From a healthy distance, you could read that as shock, avoidance, or self-protection. From inside my June mind, every silence is guilt. No answer becomes evidence that he can't defend himself. The lack of engagement feeds the story I am already telling, that he is a failed protector who has abandoned both his brother and me. Nana, the silent witness. The chat with Nana has its own long history. Addresses, travel details, light family banter. Early 2024, it starts to buckle under heavier content. I send her screenshots of legal documents, private lender threats, long descriptions of what my father did in the 1980s and 1990s. I tell her I'm ready to embarrass the whole family if that's what it takes. She sends back an eyes emoji, then, "Are you okay?" When she says she can't help with power of attorney, but offers practical support. "If you need anything else, let me know. Look after yourself." My June brain doesn't hear care. It hears refusal. I place her in the role of someone who sees all the harm, but protects the abusers from consequences. She becomes, in my mind, the cousin who knows and stays quiet. So when Tony dies, and I begin saying Halim killed his brother into my recordings, Nana is already standing in the dock next to him in my internal courtroom. She hasn't done anything specific in those days beyond responding cautiously to my messages. But she fits the role, the one who has watched this family for decades, who could speak and doesn't. My WhatsApp behavior treats her that way. I flood her with links and screenshots. Each non-response registers as another count in the indictment. The dead man walking image. One act from that period still hits like a punch when I look at it. In May 2024, in the small hours of the morning, I pull up an older photo of Tony from Sade's Bucks night. He is standing in a living room wearing the oversized Gap Yeezy shirt I had given him, holding a drink, looking straight at the camera. There is nothing mocking in the original photo. It is just Tony, a bit self-conscious, a bit amused. I turn it into something else. On my phone, I lay huge orange letters over the picture. Dead man walking. Then at 3:46 a.m., I send it into the family chat with the caption, "I believe this captures my sentiments exactly." I send it to Nana. I send it to Halim. I know Tony will see it too if he checks the group. At the time, I tell myself I'm forcing everyone to face how serious his condition is, how much he has changed. But the reality is harsher. I am mocking my cousin while he is still alive, turning his body and our shared in-joke about the shirt into a weapon. I am talking about him as if he is already dead. And I am doing it publicly, inside a thread where his siblings and cousins can watch. Less than 3 weeks later, I will be taken to Concord under Section 22. Looking back now, the manic features are obvious, treating a stylized image as a prophetic statement, using graphic text instead of conversation, believing that humiliation will finally force people to acknowledge the crisis, and completely ignoring how it lands on Tony himself. In my head, it was a truth-telling gesture. In practice, it was cruelty layered on top of a disease none of us could control. Mum and Emily pulled into the same storm. While I am turning Halim and Nana into targets, the chats with Mum and Emily are carrying a different kind of weight. Mum's thread is full of old hurt. Messages years earlier where she tells me she feels used, that I only come to her when I need something. In June 2024, she is the one who moves between wards at Concord, telling me Tony has died. Her messages are short and practical. "Where are you? Have you eaten?" They said. But I load them with expectation. Part of me wants comfort. Part of me wants her to finally testify with me against my father and his siblings. When she can't meet both roles at once, I experience that as another failure to protect. Emily's chat holds the domestic world, the kids, the house, money, everyday logistics. In June, it also holds late-night essays about my father, my uncles, the trusts, and Tony. I send her links to the podcasts where I expose the family. She replies with concern, trying to anchor me back to small, concrete things. What we're doing tomorrow, who is picking up our son, whether I've slept. I drag her into the same moral battlefield I'm waging with Halim and Nana, even as she is trying to keep a circle of normal life around us. The thread with Joe, my affectionate name for Youssef, Tony, and Halim's brother, sits somewhere between these worlds. Half cousinly banter, half attempts to recruit him to my side of the story. I send him comments about work, Happy Lion, what they are doing to us. He responds unevenly. I treat his hesitations and gaps as more evidence that no one is willing to fully face the truth. Everyone on the same screen. If you line the chats up side by side, Halim, Nana, Mum, Emily, Joe, you can see how small the physical distance really was. Everything is happening on the same glass rectangle. The image of Tony in the Gap shirt with "dead man walking" stamped over his head. The memo where I say, "Halim killed his brother, kill yourself, bye, love you." A quiet message from Mum asking if I've eaten, a practical line from Emily about the kids, a cautious, "Are you okay?" from Nana, an unread YouTube link in Halim's thread. From outside that period, it looks scattered, almost incoherent. From inside my June mind, it felt completely unified. Each chat was another corridor in the same building. The courthouse, where I was finally, furiously, trying to prosecute the people I believed had failed Tony and failed me. I didn't have the medical facts of his illness straight. I didn't know what Emma had said to him in his last minutes, what choices had been made on that ward, how much care had been poured into him in the months before. What I had were fragments, old wounds, and a phone full of tools for turning grief into message, message into evidence, and evidence into attack. Part of writing this chapter now is facing what that actually looked like on their screens. Not just a man in pain, but a cousin, son, husband, and brother firing grief outward at the very people who were standing closest to Tony as he slipped away. Leaving work and burning bridges, Osco and the Toxic Brothers. By the end of June, the Osco story and Tony's story were tangled so tightly in my head that I couldn't pull them apart. On paper, they are separate tracks. One is about a construction company, unpaid invoices, debt lists, and endless negotiation over what I'm owed. The other is about a cousin with a catastrophic neurological illness. In my June 2024 mind, they become the same story. Vulnerable people suffer, while men who control money and jobs look after themselves. Once the 4-day knot around Tony's death is past, that belief hardens into action. I start cutting ties. Debt lists and toxic brothers. In the Osco Sucks memo from 17 June, I sound like an accountant with a megaphone. I list amounts down to the last dollar. 100,000 here, 14 grand there. Loans to cousins, hours worked on sites that never paid properly. Each figure is tied to a name. Halim and Mansour, who both own Osco. Mark Tawak, who owns TQM with his brother. The extended network I describe as junkies and thieves. The numbers are accurate enough to sound forensic, but the conclusion I draw from them is absolute. They are exploiting me, and they always have been. After Tony dies, that spreadsheet logic fuses with grief. In my head, the equation looks something like, if they can leave me carrying 6 figures of unpaid work, of course they can fail their own brother. Of course they can leave him to choke. That leap compresses years of messy business into a single moral verdict. There is no space for partial truths, that we all misjudged jobs, that I agreed to things without contracts, that some debts are genuine disputes rather than clean theft. In the story I tell myself at Concord and on the road, those details are noise. The signal is they are toxic, and staying near them is death. F. Mark Tawak and Mosman Construction. The podcast file later labeled F. Mark Tawak and Mosman Construction and TQM captures that shift from private resentment to public rupture. Across that recording, I do several things at once. I name specific jobs and payment figures, including a claim that I've been defrauded of $100,000. I describe Mark's behavior in language that is overwhelmingly hostile and contemptuous. I extend the indictment to Mosman Construction and TQM as systems built on exploitation and lies. I end the episode with a kind of curse, a warning that I will not work with them again, and that I will keep telling this story. What stands out now is the tone. High volume, repetitive, saturated with expletives. There are reasonable complaints buried in the monologue. Real underpayment, genuine frustration with cash flow games. But they are carried on a tidal wave of rage. Any listener who doesn't know the backstory would hear it less as a business dispute than as a declaration of war. In June, that was exactly how it felt. Leaving Osco and the wider Mosman TQM orbit didn't feel like a painful business decision. It felt like moral hygiene. I started describing them as toxic brothers. I fantasized about court cases and criminal charges. I talked about walking away from projects midstream as a kind of sacrifice, losing income in order to save my soul, laboring, building, and refusing to work for wolves. The Laboring and Building podcast sits beside this as a kind of manifesto. In that episode, I talk about the dignity of labor, the way migrant families build wealth on the backs of unpaid or underpaid relatives, my own history of working on sites since I was young, and the feeling that I have been treated as muscle with a brain attached, rather than a partner. I frame my withdrawal from certain jobs as a refusal to be used any longer. I say, in different words, that I am done working for wolves. I contrast what I see as my own integrity, careful quotes, DBP registration, forensic rectification work, with the shortcuts and corner cutting of others. Taken on its own, This could read as a principled stand by a small builder against bad practice. But in context, coming days after Tony's death and my admission to Concord, it is also something else. A way to reroute unbearable grief into a battlefield I know how to fight on. I do know how to write furious emails, pull off a job, and refuse to sign a variation. So I pour myself into the arena where I still understand the rules. The cost of clean exits from inside the June narrative, leaving OSCO and related jobs feels clean. I am breaking from exploiters. I am refusing to be complicit in a family system that harms vulnerable people. I am protecting myself, and in some grand sense, honoring Tony. From the outside, the cost is clearer. Financially, I am burning future income at a time when my own household is under pressure. Jobs evaporate. Relationships with subcontractors fray. Relationally, every abrupt exit deepens the rift with cousins who are already bewildered by my behavior. Clinically, it narrows my world. Each bridge burned leaves fewer people who can realistically reach in and say, "Andrew, you're not well." In other words, the exits feel like escape routes, but function like self-isolation. By the end of June, I have cast myself as the only clean man in a dirty system. That position is intoxicating and lonely at the same time. Talking to the void, podcasts, and YouTube as pressure valve. By late June, the place I feel most powerful and least interrupted is not a work site or a family gathering. It's in front of a microphone. The run of podcasts I record after Tony's death is a tour of every grievance and fear in my head. Topics jump from one case to another. Family criminality and addiction, heroin, gambling, domestic violence, Happy Lion and the trusts, who controls the assets, who benefits, who has been cut out, church gaslighting, priests who minimize abuse, parish politics, sex and exploitation, prostitution, Maronite respectability, double lives, cannabis and red Lebanese hash, my relationship with THC, its comfort and its cost. Each episode has its own heading: family criminality, abuse and addiction, the property in Mudgee, my paranoid schizophrenic uncle, prostitution, Maronites in Sydney and Tahi, the brothers Karamazov, and the desolation of Happy Lion Pty Limited, social media and social gatherings, the value of selling Redfern. But emotionally, they are installments of the same series. Pressured speech disguised as careful storytelling. Listening back now, one thing is consistent across those recordings: the sense that I cannot stop talking. The episodes are dense. I move quickly from one anecdote to another. I overlay financial detail with literary references. I bring in Dostoevsky, church fathers, building contracts, and childhood memories in a single breath. On the surface, it sounds organized. I divide into parts. I announce themes. I sometimes say, "Let me come back to that." But underneath, there is classic pressured speech. Silence feels dangerous. If I pause, something unbearable might catch up with me. Tony's death sits in the background of many of these monologues. Sometimes I mention him directly as another casualty of the family system. More often, he appears indirectly as the invisible endpoint of my arguments about vulnerable men and neglect. Even when the nominal topic is Mosman construction or prostitution in Sydney, what I am really talking about is safety and abandonment. The microphone becomes a way to outrun the feeling that I didn't protect him, that I wasn't there when he died. If I keep explaining, maybe someone, God, the audience, the court in my head, will eventually declare that I was right. Social media as courtroom, YouTube, and later, TikTok, are not just platforms for me in June 2024. They are institutions. I talk about uploading as if I am filing evidence. In the podcast, Social Media and Social Gatherings, I make this explicit. I describe the way parties and church events feel false, people smiling and pretending nothing is wrong, and contrast that with the rawness of posting online. If I publish a video titled gaslighting, and St. Charbel's parish punch bowl, I cannot be ignored as easily as when I raise the same issue at a family lunch. The internet offers three things my actual life does not seem to provide in that moment. An audience, even if it's tiny, it is not visibly rolling its eyes. A record. Videos and podcasts can be pointed to later as proof that I said this when no one listened. A fantasy of consequence. I imagine priests, cousins, builders, and lawyers secretly watching and feeling exposed. The downside is that the audience is not just imaginary antagonists. It is also friends, extended family, strangers. I am broadcasting the rawest, most unfiltered version of my manic thinking to anyone who stumbles across it. I am building a public archive of my least stable months. At the time, the risk doesn't register. What matters is that I have found a place where I can press record, speak without interruption, and hit upload instead of send to Hallam or send to Mum. Broadcasting becomes both symptom and safety valve. Narrative control as self-medication. Across these episodes, there is a shared belief. If I can narrate everything, the abuse, the money, the faith, the drugs, the deaths, then I can survive it. The podcasts are not just about exposing others. They are also about containing myself. When I give a title to an experience, the ballad of the bipolar, the triathlon in mania, the desolation of Happy Lion, I turn chaos into a chapter. Once it is a chapter, I can pretend it is manageable. In that sense, the microphone is doing the same job as the car, the statues, the sticky wall, and the drives to Cookamidgera. It orders the unbearable into stories I can move through. The price is that other people's privacy, dignity, and grief are often collateral damage. My June 2024 mind, persecutory, grandiose, exhausted. When I zoom out over June 2024, what I see is not a series of unrelated episodes, a fighting cousin, a collapsing business arrangement, a dead relative, a string of podcasts. I see a mind trying desperately to stay intact. Certain ingredients are clear: sleep, broken, shallow, often replaced by late-night driving, writing, or recording. THC, frequent cannabis use that softens edges in the short term and blurs reality in the long term. Stress load, AVO proceedings, trust disputes, years of accumulated resentment about unpaid work and childhood violence. Temperament, a brain that naturally thinks in systems, money flows, property maps, family trees, theological patterns. Layered on top of that is bipolar acceleration. The June audio dataset shows the arc. Messages getting longer and sharper, themes joining together into grand chains of causality, language tipping from intense to apocalyptic. The clinical outline and social work assessment would later frame this as a mixed manic state with psychotic features. From inside, it felt like being wide awake inside a nightmare I had to explain before it swallowed me. Persecutory maps. I have always been good at building maps. Development feasibility spreadsheets, loan schedules, timelines of who lent what to whom. In June 2024, that same skill is turned toward blame. Tony's illness is not just one awful fact. My mind connects it to my father's heroin years and violence, my uncle's psychosis and the day I took him to the psych ward, my brother's time on suicide watch, the church's failure to protect victims, OSCO debts and trust arrangements. Those connections are not entirely invented. All of those events really happened. What changes is the causal chain. Instead of seeing them as multiple tragedies and failures in a complicated family, my June brain welds them into a single line. Abusers and cowards at the top, vulnerable men at the bottom. No one intervenes. They die or lose their minds. Once that line is drawn, nearly everything fits. A statue facing inward, a debt unpaid, a priest's silence, a rates notice, a McDonald's meal. Each becomes a tile in a mosaic of persecution. It is not that I completely lose touch with facts. It is that facts become servants of the story. From a clinical perspective, this is persecutory thinking, interpreting neutral or ambiguous details as evidence of hostile intent. From the inside, it feels like finally seeing how all the pieces fit. Grandiose responsibility. At the same time, there is a strong counterbelief. If everyone else is corrupt, then I must be the one to set things right. That shows up in fantasies of courtrooms where I expose the whole extended family, plans to restructure every major asset, sell Happy Lion, sell Redfern, redraw the trust, redistribute wealth. Spiritual language in which I am the only honest voice, calling the church, the cousins, and even the state to account. There is a grandiosity here, but it is not about thinking I am a celebrity or a genius. The narrative says, if I don't speak, no one will. If I don't act, more people like Tony will be destroyed. That belief carries a twisted kind of comfort. If everything depends on me, then I am not powerless. The cost is that I lose sight of other people's agency. Emma at Tony's bedside, doctors in the ward, relatives who have quietly been doing care work for years. They shrink to background figures in a drama where I am both prosecutor and savior. Exhaustion under the noise. Underneath the persecutory logic and grandiose responsibility, there is something much simpler. I am exhausted and scared. The car trips, the swimming, the late-night recordings, the asset plans, the podcasts, all of them are ways of not sitting still with two brutal sentences. My cousin is dying, and I did not know how to help. I am not well, and I am scared of what I might do. Every time I call someone a coward or a criminal, there is a quieter suspicion in the background that I am also failing, that I have also looked away from people I should have protected. Turning the volume up on everyone else's failures stops that suspicion from getting too loud. From a therapeutic angle, that is the core of June 2024, a mind trying to protect itself from shame and helplessness by building a universe where everyone else is more guilty. The persecutory maps and grandiose missions are not random delusions. They are armor. What the mind was trying to protect, seen through that lens, my June 2024 mind was protecting me from at least three things. Helplessness in the face of illness and death. Accepting that Tony's leukodystrophy was fast, brutal, and beyond my control would mean accepting that some tragedies cannot be prevented. That idea felt intolerable. Blaming Halim and Nana, the church, Osco, or my father allowed me to swap helplessness for anger. Old, unprocessed child fear. The same people now standing around hospital beds are the people who once shouted, hit, used heroin, disappeared. My manic logic is built on top of a much younger terror. That no adult is safe, that I have to be my own parent. June gives that child a megaphone. The possibility that I am ill, admitting that I am in a manic psychotic state, would mean surrendering some of the very tools I am using to survive. The fast thinking, the long nights, the righteous anger. It is easier to frame myself as exposed truth teller than very unwell man in need of help. Naming those defenses now is not about disowning June Andrew. It is about understanding what he was up against and why these extreme strategies made sense at the time. Bridge to the next chapter. By the time June 2024 closes, several facts are fixed in place in my life, even if the meanings I give them are still distorted. Tony is dead. I was not with him when he died. I learned about it as a psychiatric patient in the same hospital. In my June story, his death sits as the latest proof that our family destroys its vulnerable. My relationship with key relatives is scorched. Halim and Nana are no longer just cousins. They are symbols of betrayal. Mom is caught between care and accusation. Emily is holding the domestic world together while being pulled into a war she did not start. Joe and others are wary, confused, or quietly stepping back. Work has become another casualty. The Osco-Mosman TQM orbit that once provided income and identity is now framed as morally contaminated. I have walked away from projects, issued public denunciations, and rebranded myself as a remedial builder who refuses to work with wolves. The financial consequences are beginning to surface, even if I don't fully register them yet. A public narrative is running on its own momentum. Dozens of podcasts and videos are now online, detailed, angry, sometimes insightful, often cruel. They create a trail that other people, lawyers, clinicians, future me, can follow. June is no longer just a month I lived. It is a month I published. Internally, I finished June convinced that I have finally seen the family system clearly, and that my only choices are to expose it or be swallowed by it. Externally, people who care about me are watching a man who is burning through relationships, money, and privacy at a speed that frightens them. The chapters that follow will move into the second half of 2024. New deaths, new losses, fresh attempts to use story, evidence, and moral frameworks to control what feels uncontrollable. Tony's death will echo through all of that, sometimes as a raw wound, sometimes as a symbol I mishandle, sometimes as a point of slow, painful correction as I learn more about how he was actually cared for and how he actually died. For now, Chapter 6 ends with a simple, unfinished truth. I left June 2024 believing I was fighting for justice for Tony and for myself. I did not yet understand how much collateral damage that fight was causing, or how long it would take to untangle the grief, illness, and history that had fused in my mind that month. Epilogue: Tony seen clearly. By the time I sit by the water in September 2025, phone propped up on a rock and sunset in the background, Tony has been dead for more than a year, and the story in my head about his death has started to change shape. In the first video I record there, I talk straight to the camera about Dead Man Walking and admit, finally, that I had turned Tony's decline into proof that his brothers were monsters. I describe how, in my manic state the year before, I convinced myself that Halim and Yusef's cocaine use meant they must have failed him, that they didn't care, that their addiction and my old resentments were somehow the real cause of his death. I say out loud that in my crazed mind, I used their struggles as justification for my aggression, my vulgar messages, even the way I fantasized about spitting on his memory. I also say something I could never have said in June 2024, that none of this was forced on me from outside. No one made me carry that belief. I chose it because it fit the way I already felt, like a victim of the family, and therefore like Tony must have been a victim too. That belief gave me a shape to pour my rage into. In the video, I describe it as oppressive, as something that sat on my chest and would not move. What begins to move it is a phone call. Between that first waterfront video and the second, I speak to the person who held Tony's hand as he died, his sister-in-law, Emma, the same woman who had been there in the ward, the same voice I had ignored when I was deep in my own storyline. She tells me the details I did not have, or could not hold, in 2024. That Tony was safe, that he was being fed and cared for, that his family were with him, that he was not abandoned in a corner of the hospital while everyone looked away. She tells me something that never appears in my June recordings at all, that in those final minutes he gripped her hand tightly and would not let go, and that when she told him his kids would be okay, it wasn't enough. He only released his grip when she promised to look after Yusef specifically. In that description, there is no villain, no murder, no chip. There is a man with a catastrophic neurological disease, clenching the hand of someone he trusts, while she tries to give him enough reassurance to leave. When I record the second video by the water a few weeks later, I call this phone call medicine. I say that hearing the truth about his last hours begins to dissolve the picture I had been clinging to. The one where there were demons all over him, and his family were somehow torturing him as he died. I admit that this story was my delusion, not their behavior. And I put words finally to the shame that sits underneath all the rage. The knowledge that I projected my own experience of the family onto his death, and that it was wrong. In that same video, I correct the details that Chapter 6 has to end with. Tony did not choke on a single McDonald's chip as the decisive cause of death. His family did not stand around letting him degenerate because they didn't care. They went above and beyond, followed medical advice, and stayed with him. He was safe, fed, and loved. He was not alone. I also learned that nobody ever played my vile audio message to him. The scene that haunted me, Tony lying there, paralyzed, forced to listen to my abuse, did not happen. I had built that image out of half-heard fragments and my own guilt, and then used it as further fuel. Hearing that it is false doesn't erase what I did, but it does remove one of the cruelest fantasies from the loop. Rewatching the June 2024 recording, "I Love You, Tony," from the funeral day, I can hear that somewhere underneath the anger, this clarity was always there in fragments. In that clip, I talk about how much I love him, how I didn't say it enough when he was alive, how the real tragedy is the missed chances to show that love. I talk about needing to process the guilt, hate, and hurt until I get to acceptance, and how once there, I'll be able to see Tony the way that he was, not the way that you think it should have been. The epilogue of this chapter is where that line finally comes true. What I hold now, writing this, is a different pair of images than the ones that drove me in June. Not the mental CCTV of a chip lodged in his throat, but the memory of him sitting at my son's birthday, slightly distant, as if something in him was already pulling away from the world. Not the fantasy of a family ringed around him with malice, but the report of a woman holding his hand while he squeezed hard enough to leave marks, and only let go when she named the brother he was worried about. Those images do not erase the hurt I carried, or the very real damage that was happening elsewhere in the family system. They sit beside it. The point of putting them here at the end of Chapter 6 is not to tidy up the narrative into something neat, but to ground it in what is now known to be true. Tony's illness began suddenly around 2023 and took him down in less than a year. By early 2024, he could not speak, walk reliably, or control his bladder and bowels. His family kept taking him back and forth to hospital, trying to manage a disease that moved quicker than anyone was prepared for. My mind, under the pressure of mania, old trauma, and THC, turned that catastrophe into another proof that vulnerable men are abandoned, and then went hunting for culprits. It is important, for me and for anyone reading this in a clinical or legal context, to mark that distinction carefully. Tony's leukodystrophy is a medical fact. My belief that Halim killed his brother is a symptom and a story. Both mattered in June 2024, but they are not the same kind of thing. Ending Chapter 6 here, with the waterfront videos and Emma's account, is my way of refusing to let the manic story have the last word. The 4-day knot remains what it was, a period where I was dangerously unwell, where I said and did things that hurt people I loved, and where my brain fused grief with persecution in a way that felt completely real from the inside. That doesn't get rewritten. What does get rewritten is Tony's place inside it. In this final frame, he is no longer just a symbol of what the family does to its vulnerable. He is once again the man I grew up with, my best friend, the one I ranted and joked with at Bucks nights and dreamed of in a Mustang on an American highway. The one who lost his speech and his independence in the space of a year. The one whose hand someone held until he could let go. If there is any justice I can offer him now, it is this: to keep telling the truth about my own mind without turning him into a prop, and to let the record show that whatever I believed in June 2024, Tony was loved and cared for to the very end.